All right, welcome, welcome. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to this webinar today, hosted by the Association of Corporate Counsel and Smith, Gambrell, and Russell. And we also have Veritex here presenting this afternoon. We're very excited about that. Thank you for everyone that joined. We have a great group, a large number of people joining us today, so we're excited about that. Wanted to quickly go over the agenda for the next couple of hours. So I'm Lee Watts. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at Smith, Gambrell, and Russell. I will briefly talk about just maintaining a professional virtual presence, not just in the courtroom or in mediations, but also we know that in the new normal, we are in a lot of meetings within our firms, within our companies, with clients, with prospective clients, and just how we show up and some things that we can avoid to not make a bad impression with people that we really want to impress. Next, we will have Emily Ward. She is an attorney at Smith, Gambrell, and Russell in our white collar litigation practice, and she is going to share some experiences and tips on presenting in the courtroom via video and share her experiences with that. And next we have Brian McCann. He is the Vice President of Veritex Solutions, and he will help us eliminate some of those technology fears and also talk about mediations via video. We will also wrap up with some questions. After Emily and between Emily and Brian, we will also have just a brief time to stretch and also ask some questions. So feel free to use the chat, use the Q&A, and I will monitor that throughout this afternoon and go through some of those questions at the appropriate time. So maintaining your professional presence, specifically on video. So first of all, we have seen that there have been some trends during the pandemic. There has been a 52% increase on LinkedIn, just generally just talking about digital transformation and how things have changed. Zoom has added more users in 2020 than it did in all of 2019, according to Bernstein research. And not just Zoom, we know that many more people are on other platforms such as WebEx and Skype and, just many other of the video conferencing platforms. So we know that people are actively using video conferencing now, and we believe this is just the new normal. We will probably not go too far backwards, but we'll continue using video conferencing for business and, again, meeting with clients, meeting with coworkers. So making a good impression on video conference and teaching or treating it like it is a real meeting is very important. And more than anything, over 90% of the information that we consume is transmitted to the brain is visual. So how we show up visually is very important. And I think when things first started with the pandemic, people were a little bit more casual and they were in their homes and kind of showing up as they were, at home in a casual way. And that is okay sometimes, but just always remembering that this is this is business. And if you're coming to a meeting with clients and with your colleagues, just the right way to show up and that you're always making an impression. And what is the impression that you want to make? It's still business. It's still a meeting. It's still the courtroom. So we're going to talk about that shortly. So as we've heard, there have been several fumbles in the courtroom and with attorneys. And we even had someone ask, who's litigating in pajamas, right? We've seen on social media, we've seen a little bit also in the news that lawyers were dressing way too casual during court hearings on Zoom, said one judge. We saw, a litigator, an attorney show up in their pajamas on Zoom. And unfortunately, the video that went viral on Twitter where someone was using Zoom or camera in the bathroom, and when she placed it on the floor, we ended up seeing way too much. And so that video ended up going viral. So lots of fumbles can happen during video. So we have to really be careful with that. But before we go into some great things that we can do to maintain our video professional presence, let's just talk about a few things that are very common and not as dramatic as taking the camera into the bathroom, but things that we may do subconsciously and just not aware that we're doing them. So not to look bored. We're very visual creatures, right? And many of us are very expressive, and we may not realize during a long meeting on video that we are looking bored. We see this picture of this woman kind of slumped over, and her body language is telling a lot. So being aware of our body language and our facial expressions. If you are presenting, make sure you do not share the wrong screen. So one of the things that I do when I'm presenting, I know that I have to present via video, is I will minimize anything that I'm not, or close out anything that I'm not going to share or during that meeting, so that I do not make a mistake and share the wrong presentation, the wrong document, the wrong screen. So be careful of that. Don't forget to alert your housemates or whomever may be in the same vicinity as you when you are going on a video call, video meeting, so that there aren't people walking maybe behind you or making loud noises or having other conversations when you also may be speaking. Don't take another call. Many of us have seen this during a video conference meeting. The person may be on mute, but you suddenly see them pick up their cell phone and they start having another call on video while another person is presenting. And silence your phones. Again, you may be on mute, but there may be a time you go off mute and we hear your phone ring, we hear dinging and all kinds of things. So make sure that you silence your phone. I think the underlying principle through everything that I'm going to share today is to try not to be a distraction on video conferencing. And there are lots of ways that can happen, so we'll go through that, but I'll probably say that many times during this next 30 minutes is try not to distract. Whoever the host or whoever's speaking, presenting during a meeting, giving them the floor, the respect to present without a lot of distractions. And we'll talk about what some of those are. So number one, things that we can do is look behind you. So be aware of your background. Again, at the beginning of this, there were many video calls where we saw messy beds behind us. We saw piles of laundry, even maybe some pictures and things that maybe you did not intend for maybe your clients or coworkers to see. So just be aware of your background. Now we know that there are, specifically on Zoom, I think WebEx is also adopting this, and there may be others, where you can choose a wallpaper as an option. So a couple of things when choosing wallpaper. Still be strategic about the wallpaper that you're choosing. So I've seen wallpapers that can be, again, very distracting. So it turns into us listening to the speaker and paying attention to what's happening in the meeting, the purpose of the meeting, to everyone paying more attention to the wallpaper of an attendee in the meeting. So you don't want to be a distraction, or even if you are speaking, you want people to hear you and listen to you and not pay attention to what's behind you. Also, when selecting the wallpaper, using the wallpaper option, keep in mind, if you are a speaker that moves a lot, speaks with their hands, when you're moving, you're going in and out of that wallpaper, which again can be distracting because it's movement. And especially if you're speaking or even if you're not speaking, just being aware that that constant movement is moving for the viewer as well. So not saying that you shouldn't use the wallpaper option, but know your own habits. I am not a great candidate for a wallpaper option because I know that I move and I speak with my hands, and so it would be a big distraction. So this is pretty obvious, and I think by now most of us have this pretty much under control, but professional grooming. So again, we're talking about this in the context of courtrooms and mediations and business. So just like you would not show up to a meeting with your colleagues or with a client, you know, looking unprofessional or ungroomed, again, treating video meetings in the same way. So life gets busy. Working from home is very different. It can be very different than going into the office. Lots of things pop up, but it may be helpful to have that blazer near your desk, or that go-to scarf, or again, jacket, or something, some kind of uniform that you can quickly pull together if there's a last minute video meeting. So that you can still show up and look. It doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to be a tie every single time, but at least showing up like you are prepared for a business meeting, remembering it's still a work meeting. And also on Zoom, and again, I think WebEx is also adopting this feature, you have the option for a filter. So you don't always need this, but if you maybe are looking tired and or ladies don't have a chance to, you know, spruce up your makeup, there is a small feature on Zoom that will add a filter. So this is a really important one. So knowing your angles. So angles are really important, camera angles. Being sure not to go too high or come too low. So you don't want to completely look up at the camera, or look down so that way that the viewers are just looking, you know, looking up your nose or looking up your chin, which is not always the best angle. So try to have it at eye level or at least shoulder level. It's very common for people to have to find that special book that they know that they're always going to have to tuck underneath their laptop to give them the right angle. The key is, if you know that you're presenting or you have an important video meeting, don't wait until the time of the meeting to make sure that you have the right angle and the right lighting, which we'll talk about. So test that, know what's going to work for your workstation at home or wherever you're presenting from. So make eye contact. So I'm guilty of this many times. I will multitask and try to do other things during my presentations, or if I'm watching someone and, you know, you have other documents open, you're typing, you're answering emails, but if at all possible, try to minimize that, especially if it's in an intimate meeting, a smaller meeting, and really watch the speaker. Try not to watch yourself and watch the speaker. It's, again, equivalent to if you were in a conference room with your clients, with other colleagues, you would not, hopefully, not look down at your phone the whole time they're speaking, or write or read or do other things while they're speaking. As a speaker, it is very uncomfortable to present or talk when no one is watching you and everyone else, that they're all looking down at something else. So try to make eye contact when you can, when you are watching on video. Let your light shine. So yes, lighting and angles are very important. So if the absolute wrong way to do this is to have the window behind you. You will come up on the camera pretty much as a silhouette, you know, dark, and just an outline of your body. So that can be distracting because, again, the person is not able to see you, see facial expressions, not have a real conversation with you when all they're seeing is a silhouette. So try to put light behind your laptop, behind the camera, or to the side of the camera. Natural light is best if you can do that. So sometimes I will set up a little, my own little station in front of a door where I know light is coming in, my front door or something like that. So find the best rooms, the best places in your house, or again, even if this is in your office, sometimes I have to move things around in my office to make sure the light is coming in the right way if I'm on a video call. And just find out what works best for you. But the thing to avoid is having all the light behind you. It should be, the majority of the light should be behind your laptop or behind your camera. So yes, hit that mute button. You should know immediately, especially if it's a new platform, where your mute button is. Because you will need to use it. And preferably as soon as you get on, go ahead and hit that mute button so that you, if there are any noises coming from where you are or potentially coming from where you are, make sure that you're easily close to and can easily hit that mute button and respect the meeting that's happening and the speaker. And also, you may think that your room is, wherever you are, it's quiet. But oftentimes there are noises coming that you're not even aware of. Sometimes our computers are putting out a lot of heat or energy, or just rebooting or doing things that we are not aware is happening, or we don't hear it as much, but the microphone is picking it up. So a good rule of thumb is just to stay on mute until it's time for you to speak. If it's a back and forth conversation, then that's fine. You don't want to have to keep hitting mute and unmute, but as much as possible, if you're primarily listening, then put yourself on mute. Also, I want to go back to that as well. Test your sound prior to the meeting, making sure that if you are speaking, there are ways on, I think, almost every one of the platforms, you can test your speakers and test your microphone. So you can hear what you will sound like to the listeners. And if it's not as crisp and clear as you would like for it to be, investing in a microphone, it doesn't have to be very expensive, but if you know that you're doing a lot of speaking and a lot of presenting via video conference, it may be worth just buying a $20, $30 microphone to always plug in so that you can have a very crisp sound when presenting. So eat, drink, and be merry later. So this doesn't mean that you can't have coffee and water when you're on a video conference. But again, the underlying principle of all of this is that you do not want to be a distraction during a video conference meeting. So if you are deciding to eat a full lunch during a video conference call meeting with especially colleagues or with a client, that can be distracting. So try to be discreet if you just have to eat during a meeting, but if at all possible, please do it before or after. And then the drinking part is, yes, it's fine to, like, as I mentioned, to sip on a cup of coffee or sip on some water. But if you're going to completely turn up a bottle of Pepsi or Coca-Cola or something, again, those are sudden movements, and we may all stop and turn toward you because we just saw you, drinking and eating and making all these gestures. So again, turn the video off if you have to during that time and do what you need to do, or do it before or after the meeting. So this kind of goes to a good segue into what I just said. Join the party. So if you are joining a meeting and everyone is on video, you should join too. Again, it's like showing up to an in-person meeting, but not really showing up. Like, I'll call in, even though I might be down the hall, I just don't feel like joining you all. So if everyone is on video, you should join too. If you are unable, just send a message either during or before the meeting to the host and just let them know why you are not going to be on video. Again, this is not necessarily as critical if there are 40 people on a call or something like this where, you know, no one is really seeing you and everyone is focused on maybe on one person. But if there is a call with a client, with colleagues where there are, you know, 2 to 10 people where everyone is kind of interacting and looking at each other and you're the one person that's not doing that, just give people the courtesy to let them know why you're not joining via video. And then finally, you have the ability to update your name. I know for sure on WebEx and on Zoom, I'm sure some of the other platforms as well, but it's a great way to remind people, especially if you're in a meeting where not everyone knows everyone. And you may log in and your company number may come up instead, or whoever organized the meeting may have misspelled your name or has your long name, your formal name, and you want to be called something else. Go ahead and I know on Zoom, if you right click at the top on the right hand side on that blue button, you're able to rename your name. So, and that's, you know, just helpful with networking and talking to each other. So those are just a few points on sharing your, maintaining a professional presence on video. So now, and I'm going to monitor questions and comments, as I said, throughout the meeting, and we're going to have a time where I will address those. Now we're going to turn it over to Emily Ward, as I mentioned, an attorney at Smith, Gambrell, and Russell, and she's going to address video in the courtroom. So thank you. Okay, I think Emily may be frozen. Okay, so I am going to see, we're going to come back to Emily. And Brian, are you available? Do you want to go ahead and take it over?
Sure.
Okay.
And
wait, there's Emily. She's back. Emily, you and I were just talking about this, right?
The only way it could possibly work out is the internet has to go out that moment.
There you go.
Well, thank you, Brian, for being so flexible. We'll go ahead and, Emily, you're ready?
Let's see if everything's going to cooperate. All right. All right, I think, is it all looking okay on that end?
It looks great.
Okay, great. Well, hi everyone, my name's Emily Ward, and as Lee said, I am a litigator at Smith Gambrell. I primarily do white collar litigation, but right now with grand juries still not really meeting and looking to indict anybody, I'm doing a lot of civil litigation, which is keeping me busy until I'm sure a lot of COVID fraud starts coming my way. But I am very happy to be here and hoping to impart a little bit of practical experience and wisdom for everyone who's going to have to get used to practicing virtually, maybe in a courtroom, could be in mediation, it could just be a conference with the judge later on. So I've had a couple of experiences with that over the past couple months, and I'm sure to have a couple more. Whenever you're appearing before a judge, mediator, or arbitrator, whether you're in person or in a virtual courtroom, it's a formal and serious setting where matters involving real people with real problems are heard. And even though we might be in our home. I'm currently in my kitchen. It's up to us as advocates for our clients to represent our clients with the kind of formality and decorum that a courtroom requires. I'm going to walk you through a couple of the virtual litigation experiences and tips over the next couple of minutes to hopefully help your experiences go a little bit smoother. You're going to hear me say a couple things that Lee said. And the reason I'm going to say them is because as I was preparing for this, I was looking at the advice that courts were giving, and they were saying the same things. So it seems like the message hasn't gotten around to everybody that you have to, for example, wear pants. So some of the practical logistics, just the things that are going to set you up to succeed as an advocate. Most important thing you could do is make sure you arrive on time and that you follow the virtual platform instructions that the mediation service or the court staff attorney or assistant has sent you. Even if you've used Zoom a million times, follow whatever instructions they have given just to make sure that it goes smooth on the front end. You also want to minimize the distractions and technical hiccups like I just had later on the front end as much as you can. I don't know why, but in Midtown Atlanta, sometimes my internet just goes out. So I usually have a hotspot going whenever I have something important like this going on. So today I had a hotspot going, so it didn't take me too long if something went wrong with my internet. So I would recommend, just knowing your environment. And so if you have dogs that are really loud, make sure they had a treat right before you go on to either your court appearance or that important meeting. You can also find a closet, lock the door, leave a note, make sure you tell your kids mom is going to be busy for the next half hour. Go play with your iPad. You also want to make sure that you are following that judge's instructions to a T. You don't want to delay the start of a hearing because of anything you or your client has done on your end. This could be as particular as how your name appears on the screen. Think of it like the judge's standing order. You're not going to not follow a standing order. So if they send you instructions for how to attend a Zoom or WebEx hearing, make sure you follow those instructions to a T. You also want to identify yourself either as the judge has instructed or with your real name. And if you're appearing by phone, make sure you disclose your identity immediately, even if you don't hear anybody. This is a true story that one of my friends had a couple weeks ago. Double check the name on your display. This person was in a virtual hearing with somebody. You can see there's a lawyer in a tie up above, and she pointed out to him that his name was coming up as Excellent Burger. And it turns out that his kids also use the same Zoom account, and they had been having some funny names. So this is a really great example of why, even if you've done it 1,000 times and don't think anyone has messed with your computer, make sure that you're not showing up as Judge Excellent Burger or Attorney Excellent Burger or something else. The newest pet peeve of many judges, court reporters, and just sort of the general public, me included, is not muting your mic. If you are not muted, as Lee said, you never know what in the world you're going to hear, whether it's a bag of chips or a fire engine going by. There could be feedback, there could be echoes. It's just awful. And especially if you're in the kind of setting where there's a transcript being taken, not having yourself on mute can ruin an entire transcript or large portions of a transcript. So, moral of the story, absolutely keep your mic muted except for when you're actively speaking. Not muting your mic is the new reply all. You're going to get some eye rolls from people if you're not muting your mic. So please be sure that you are muting your mic. You also want to make sure, as we've all joked and heard the horror stories, that you are maintaining that professional appearance. If you wouldn't show up in a courtroom in it, then don't show up on a Zoom or WebEx hearing in it. Business attire is always appropriate. Sweatshirts, gym clothes, Hawaiian shirts, concert t-shirts, sports teams jerseys, and pajamas are never appropriate. Similarly, make sure you're wearing pants. Courts, everyone understands now that we're all having to juggle multiple roles while working from home. So business casual can be acceptable in certain circumstances. For example, if you have a collared shirt on without a tie or a jacket, that's probably going to be okay in most settings so long as you're not having an actual trial. But that should be your minimum when you're appearing before a judge. And ladies, just throw a sweater on or a blazer, something to make you feel like a lawyer a little bit more. I know that anytime I put on a blazer, I somehow feel a little bit more like a lawyer. And I've joked, but everybody needs to wear pants. You don't want to be compared with an SNL skit. We've seen far too many screenshots of people that thought that they were done with a meeting, got up and turned around and walked off, and they literally didn't have pants on. Final just little thing, if you watch the news, you may notice that sometimes people wear a certain tie or a scarf or a blouse that has a small pattern, and that could make your appearance just look very blurry and jarring, especially if you're using a virtual backdrop in the background. So I would just, keep it boring for the sake of virtual hearings and litigation. Boring is better. You don't want anybody thinking about what you're wearing. You want them thinking about what you are saying. Also, as Lee said, you got to examine your camera angle to make sure that it's professional and flattering. And you also need to sort of think about how you typically present in a courtroom or in a professional setting. I'm somebody that I like to stand. And so I'm sitting here using a couple Amazon boxes to get my computer to the right height so that it was about eye level, because I didn't have a chair that sat in the right level. So get creative in how you get to the right level. You don't want to take it too far. This is Dr. Fauci, America's favorite doctor, and he was doing some sort of virtual interview, and he had his camera so far up that, we could basically see the crown of his head. So that's taking it one step too far. You don't want to see up someone's nose, but you also don't want to see the top of your head. And we'll talk more about this in a minute, but just if you take a quick look at his background, you can see there's boxes stacked up in the corner. It looks like he likes Amazon as well. There's lots of books stacked up. So you just want to make sure that whatever is in your background is appropriate for the courtroom. This is an example of somebody who clearly has done a couple of Zoom calls before. Senator Warren here has her camera at eye level, a very neutral background. Probably the only thing you might want to fix in this one is that we can't see all of her head, and so having a little bit of head clearance would be good. But overall, this is what you would want to see in a courtroom and before a judge, because here a judge is not going to be thinking about, I wonder what he or she ordered from Amazon. They're going to be listening to what you're saying. Participating in virtual litigation often means that we're going to be dealing with pets and dogs and kids and delivery men, but that doesn't mean that you can't still project a professional persona. Make sure you're finding a quiet space to minimize those distractions from others in the home, and make sure your cell phones or other technology are in silent mode. I do think there's a way that your cell phones can help you become a better advocate in a virtual setting, and I'll discuss that here in a couple minutes, but do make sure they are on silent, since if you are presenting, you're probably not going to be on mute. Also consider a Zoom virtual background. Not everyone has a beautiful professional home to be their backdrop, so eliminate a visual distraction and try some sort of professional Zoom background. You can Google and find some good ones. I don't recommend just Googling The Office for a Zoom background, because you're going to end up with Michael Scott. You also don't want to go with something like the Tiger King. Again, you don't want people focusing on little things in the background. You want people focusing on the arguments that you're making. So once you're set up and ready to go for a hearing, it's important to remember to be patient and be aware of your surroundings and the other participants. I recently was in a hearing where I think there were 7 or 8 of us involved in a hearing that went for 2.5 hours. So during that time period, lots of things went right and lots of things went wrong. And the biggest thing that I would emphasize to everyone who's participating in virtual litigation right now is you just need to be patient and take a second, because everybody's figuring this out together as we go through it, and giving that extra beat in between speaking so that people aren't talking on top of each other, and making sure that if you see one of your colleagues or your co-counsel, raising their hand on the Brady Bunch view, and maybe they're on mute, maybe call that to the attention of the court reporter or the judge to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So different connection speeds, bad internet connections can make it difficult to know who is speaking. So make every effort not to speak out of turn or to interfere with either someone's argument, the judge's instructions, or actual testimony. Just like in an in-person court setting, the judge will indicate when it's your turn to be heard. Even if the judge is not the most technologically savvy person, for that day, she is in charge. And so even if it's not the most efficient way to run a hearing, it's your job as an advocate to follow the instructions that the judge gives you. If you wouldn't talk over a judge in real life, don't do it virtually. And if you would do it in real life, maybe don't. A common experience, a scenario that I've experienced during this virtual litigation phase of my career is the problem of some participants being in the same room while others are appearing virtually. And if this happens to you, it's going to be even more important for you to focus on who is with you, who's speaking, and who maybe needs to speak next, because whether your connection is great or not, there's going to be a little bit of a lag between who's speaking in the same room and who is speaking virtually. At the recent hearing that I mentioned, there were two counsel in the courtroom with the judge. The judge was in the courtroom. The court reporter was virtual. I was virtual with the client in the same room as me, and my co-counsel was virtual. So there were many different connections. You know, there was definitely somebody that we were looking up his nose. There was somebody that had a perfect white background and an actual podium, and I was in a conference room with my client. Getting all those people to talk at the right time when somebody had a question for the judge, the ones that were in the courtroom were able to get his attention very quickly, while those of us that were virtual really struggled to get the judge's attention when we had a point to make or a question. So that's something that we need to just sort of, as a profession, make sure that we're being cognizant of the challenges that can occur when you do have people in different places. Another sort of lesson learned from that one is for the court reporter in particular. This young woman, she was doing her best to try and figure out how in the world she could get a proper transcript of this hearing. But what kept happening is the judge and the counsel that were in the courtroom would talk to each other, much like you would in real life, but they were doing it in such a way that they had turned away from their camera, where they were projecting themselves to us to talk to each other, so that she couldn't hear what they were saying, so she couldn't do an accurate record, and we as the counsel also couldn't hear what was saying, and so then respond. And so that was something that slowed down the entirety of the hearing itself and was really frustrating. I know I was frustrated, and the court reporter at one point just threw her hands up. So if at all possible, whether you're in person or you're virtual, just make sure that you're aware of who's speaking and who needs to be heard at that moment. You also want to make sure when you're speaking that your focus is on the camera and not your own image in the bottom corner or top corner, however you have set up your computer. You might consider minimizing your own image, since we all have a tendency to look at ourselves and you want your focus to be into the camera, just like you are focusing on someone's face. If you are able, I would encourage you to try a practice run of whatever your presentation or argument is going to be. This will give you the opportunity to self-critique and discover any odd tics or habits that you may have that could be distracting to a judge. I know that up until I started recording myself, I looked up into the left corner of rooms all the time as if the answer to all of life's questions were going to be there. And so although that's still something that I have a tendency to do, I don't do it as much because I'm more self-aware. So just like you would practice before you went before the Court of Appeals, make sure you're practicing to do a virtual argument as well. Finally, one of the most complicated things about doing virtual litigation are exhibits. If you are in something where there's just a handful of exhibits that everyone is not going to be surprised about, I would highly encourage you to share those exhibits in advance so that you're not having to worry about screen sharing or downloading some sort of file during the hearing, or losing something, trying to direct someone's attention to something that has a 42-character name rather than Exhibit 2. Screen sharing is an option. Like today, I am screen sharing on PowerPoint just a section of my screen while I have my notes, but it's a slightly terrifying situation that I might have the wrong screen up, or it might show something weird, or what if I need to look at something really quickly on another screen, what's going to happen with the screen that I'm sharing. So if you have more than 1 or 2 exhibits, I would encourage you to not screen share and to find another way to share those exhibits. One way that we have approached it, in one hearing, we had, I think each side had a dozen or so exhibits. And so the judge in this situation, he had asked us to, each side had to disclose all of their exhibits and provide a PDF copy of them to the other side the night before. Although you might lose some sort of element of surprise or gotcha, in this situation that worked so much better because you didn't have to deal with screen sharing. As we were going through the entire hearing process, we could simply say, if you'll turn to Defendant's Exhibit 4 and look at page 3. I think that overall, that's probably the best way that you can deal with multiple platforms being open on your computer at a given time, maybe needing to look at your email, and also making sure that everyone's on the same page. If you are going to download some sort of exhibit file for a specific hearing, I would make a folder on your desktop that the only thing in it are the exhibits for that hearing, so that you're not having to look for something that was saved somewhere, you can't recall what it was called, and it's somewhere in your inbox. You want to make it as simple and easy for yourself as possible so that you're not worrying about your exhibits during your hearing. You're just dealing with your argument. You might also consider going a little bit old school and having physical exhibits, so actual printout of the exhibits during your hearing or a deposition. One way that I have handled sort of having, not secret, but wanting to have a little bit of an element of surprise in a virtual setting is I FedExed exhibits to the location where the court reporter and the witness were in a deposition, and had those exhibits sealed in an envelope that was opened by the court reporter during the deposition. And so at that point, I had my copy of the exhibits. I had done the same thing so that opposing counsel could have the exhibits as well. We could all look at the physical ones while appearing virtually without having to disclose them a couple days before. So that's another great option for you. Hopefully you're not having to FedEx 200 banker boxes over there, but if you have a reasonable number of exhibits, physical ones can be a reasonable way to deal with exhibits. So during the actual hearing, it's pretty common to have 2 attorneys working on a matter. Your client might be sitting next to you during a hearing, and in real life, it's totally normal that you would whisper something or write a note to someone during a hearing so that you could make sure that some important point wasn't missed, and that any needs of your clients or insights that they might have are able to be put into your next moment to shine. So when you're appearing virtually, that can be really difficult. There are a couple of ways that you can still communicate either with your co-counsel or your client, but you need to be strategic about how you do that. One option that I think every platform has is a chat function, but I would encourage you not to use the chat function just because of the danger of human error of sending a message to everyone that is on a Zoom, including the judge and opposing counsel, or somebody not having the chat function up on their screen, and so they're going to miss it the entire time anyway. Another way that you could try and communicate if you aren't screen sharing is you could use emails. Emails back and forth may be a way for you to communicate, but sometimes that can be a little bit burdensome. And if you're somebody like me that has your emails on a minute delay to make sure that I didn't forget to attach something or say something dumb, that cannot be a very efficient way to do your communications with your counsel. The best way that I have figured out how to do it so far, and I'm open to suggestion, but I think that it's a pretty good way to do it, is everyone that you're going to want to communicate with during a hearing, start a group text. We all have our phones nearby. I know they're on silent because everyone has listened to everything that Lee said during this Zoom. But something really quickly that even if your co-counsel is in another state, they can get it right then. There's no danger of it being accidentally disclosed to the other side or going to the judge. And you can respond in real time. During the hearings that I have done during this pandemic time, I've found that to be very helpful. The client feels like they're engaged because, you know, they're sitting there talking to their attorneys as well. You want to be sure that you don't have your phone up here while you're texting back and forth. But if there's one quick point you want to make sure that your co-counsel gets out, it's really easy to just jot down a couple of words and send it in a text. So I would highly recommend just setting up a text group chat to go back and forth. Once a hearing is over, or as I know that we're going to do after I'm done, we're going to take a couple-minute break. You want to be sure that if the hearing is ending or taking a break, that you are on mute. Hopefully you've been on mute the entire time, but if you're going to, as I was in the same room as my client during a hearing, and there was a moment where we all went to go get a cup of coffee or a drink of water, you probably don't want to disconnect from the Zoom or the WebEx, but you do want to make sure that you have some privacy with your client. So this is a time where you need to make sure that you're muted. If you can turn your camera off during that time, that's another great option. An even better option is to go into another room before you start communicating with your client, just to make sure that confidentiality and your strategies are maintained with the privilege. You also want to be sure when a hearing is ending that you exit all the way, that you don't finish up a hearing, think you're on mute, and then start talking about how terrible that judge was during that hearing. If you haven't exited all the way, that means the judge is probably still hearing what you're saying. So it's just like we double and triple check things before we submit them to be filed, you need to double and triple check that your electronic communications are either on or off as appropriate. And so I don't know, Lee'll have to let me know if we're going to do Q&A right now or at the end, but in any event, I hope that some of these suggestions are helpful, and appreciate Smith Gambrell and also the Association of Corporate Counsel for having me.
Thank you so much, Emily. Very good suggestions. And I didn't know about that special trick with, first of all, I didn't know we can delay our emails. So that's good to know for a lot of other reasons.
Yes.
But I like the idea about the group chat when you know that you need to communicate with a certain group of people very quickly. And so that was a good tip. So thank you. So the only question we have so far, and please continue, let me just double check. Let us know if you have anything. Someone did ask about the best, if using a microphone, some recommendations for a good mic. I have two microphones. One, actually, I don't remember the name of it, but it was like the least expensive one I found on Amazon. And then I have a more expensive one from Getty. And there isn't as much difference between them as you would think there would be. So if you want to stay safe, I think Getty mics have a wide range of different types of different prices, and that's a well-known one. And then again, I bought one for like $20 on Amazon, and it also works pretty well.
I would just add that if you're somebody that uses earbuds that perhaps have a microphone attached to a cord, make sure that you do some sort of practice run. I know that with one of my colleagues, we were on a Zoom call and he sounded like he was underwater. So even though he could hear fine and, you know, he sounded fine to himself, he sounded terrible to those of us on the other side. And so I sent him a text to let him know, try something else. Nobody can understand what you're saying. So whatever technology you're going to use, don't use it for the very first time during some sort of important either meeting or hearing.
Yes, definitely, definitely. All right. So I think that was the only question so far. So now we're going to go ahead. I know we're moving pretty quickly. We're going to go ahead and have Brian McCann speak. Again, he is from the vice president from Veritex Solutions. And you're up north, right, Brian? You're in New Jersey?
I'm in New Jersey. Yep.
Okay.
Good old New Jersey.
Great, great, great. Well, thank you for joining us. And I know you're going to share some great insights and remove any other fears that we still may have after hearing all of these rules and things we shouldn't do. So thank you again, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lee. I appreciate it. So really just wanted to and kind of expand upon some of the things that both Emily and Lee brought up and talk about it from more of a deposition setting. So, Emily was kind of talking about, court specifically, and obviously in court, you're going to have the judge and you're going to be kind of following their lead. When you're in a deposition setting, there's kind of a little bit more room for kind of negotiation, if you will. So obviously Veritex is a court reporting company, and in many cases we are historically been asked to provide these settings. So we've been providing kind of access to depositions remotely since 2008. And it wasn't something that was used in the way that it's used today. For the most part, it would be a party, maybe a corporate representative looking in at how one of their own employees were performing under an examination or something like that. So usually it was one of the people interested in the proceeding looking in. And now obviously it evolved to everybody's remote and everybody's participating in this remote manner. So when I talk about the negotiation piece, that part of it comes down to you and your adversary agreeing on that platform. And while that sounds fairly simple and straightforward, it isn't always. So for example, as a court reporting company, Veritex will set up the environment. And in many cases, you would actually want a neutral party being responsible for that. And the reason I say that is there are options and there are things you can do within the Zoom platform from a configuration perspective that particularly from a corporate client perspective, and you guys are all representatives of corporate companies or attorneys representing corporate clients, there are a lot of security things you need to take into account. Early on, there were lots of reports about Zoom and its security risks and whatnot. Many of those were a bit overblown and kind of hyped by the media. They were what was called Zoom bombing, which were basically people gaining access to a meeting ID and then crashing the meeting ID and crashing it with images. And I heard one story of a gentleman doing his doctoral dissertation, and then all of a sudden in the middle of the dissertation, all this stuff started happening because he had published it through a Twitter feed and people who had this account logged in. That's not really a Zoom security issue as much as it was kind of not common sense to be sharing a very private setting very publicly. So you certainly wouldn't promote the URL for a deposition to multiple parties. And that in and of itself would control some of the Zoom bombing things. But some of the other things that you want to think about are, and Emily made reference to chat. Now, so chat has some great capabilities, but it also has some potentially inherent risks. And one of those inherent risks is if you have private chat, which is a default setting in Zoom, you would be able to talk to any other person individually. Now, if you are taking a deposition of a witness, the attorney defending that witness isn't necessarily with the witness, and then now they're using chat as a coaching mechanism. The witness is looking at the screen and actually getting feedback from their attorney, which obviously you wouldn't want to have happen. So, so by default, when we set up a virtual deposition, we recommend disabling, and we do by default, any of the private chat. So the chat to everybody feature is there, so you still have the ability to communicate with everyone, but there's no ability to communicate with people, any individual person. The other thing you want to think about, and you'll see we're recording the session, and you can actually see that on your screen, is recording is a capability built into Zoom. Our recommendation is to not have that enabled, that you really only want to have a videographer record a deposition. And the reason for that is you want to be able to go on and off the record. And again, Emily was talking about, when you're within earshot of a microphone, those things can be heard. If you're also recording it, not only are they heard, but they're captured. So, the idea of, video recording a Zoom session, it happens all the time. It can be very, very effective in terms of presenting evidence at trial, or even just capturing the witness's demeanor or whatnot and sharing that with other colleagues on the case. you want to do it in a way that's, professional, just like you would in a deposition setting. And the way that you would do that is you'd have a videographer. And what the videographer actually captures, and this is maybe something that people haven't thought about, is they just capture the image of the witness. So within a Zoom setting and within most of these settings, whether it's WebEx, GoToMeeting, Google Meet, whatever, they all have the ability to pin an individual video. So you would actually pin the video of the witness, and that would be the image that is actually captured by the videographer. So video is certainly doable in a remote setting, but you're not capturing the Brady Bunch look. You're actually capturing just that window of the witness, which is also an important consideration. Another thing to think about, and it kind of expands upon Emily's conversation about exhibits, is there is a feature within Zoom and within some of these platforms that allow you to do what's called an in-chat file transfer, where you actually could take a file and send it through the chat box. Really risky. It's risky because you can actually have someone send a malicious file through that chat box, and it's definitely not something that you want to do. So while it's easy and convenient and and the kind of the spur of the moment, seat of your pants type of thing, oh, this would be an easy way to do this, there's an inherent risk in doing that. So you want to think about those kinds of considerations when you're negotiating with your adversary on what platform you're going to use and who's going to be responsible for setting it up. And again, my recommendation, and obviously I might be a little biased, I work for a court reporting company, would be to have your court reporting company be that host, so that they're setting up really that neutral platform for everybody to use and not giving any individual party unilateral control where they can potentially configure the environment to suit their purposes. So that's just kind of some considerations that you to think about as you go through considering the platform. The other thing to think about is really having a conversation with your witnesses about the nature of a remote deposition. As Emily mentioned, there's this professional concept of walking into a courtroom, and when you're working from home, it's easy to kind of forget that. Really, the same thing applies to a deposition. If you're going to a court reporting company or you're going to a conference room at a law firm, there's this sense that, hey, this is a professional proceeding. And I'm not going to be looking at my phone. I'm not going to be, doing other things or multitasking. I'm 100% committed to the point, to this event, to being present for this examination. When you're remote, you really have to probably overemphasize that, particularly with witnesses who, depending on the nature of the case, may not be, sophisticated legal witnesses who've done this multiple times before. The idea of not being interrupted, not being in communication with their attorney, those things that are prohibited based on the jurisdiction that your particular case is venued in, you want to make sure that the witness understands that. And obviously that you as lawyers understand, the ethical rules still apply. This is still a deposition, so the things that you would expect to have happen in a deposition, if you were in place in the same location, that you would also want to have that same kind of respect for the proceeding. And the other thing I would say, and this is kind of goes back to your own comfort level. Part of this is really being honest with yourself. And by that, I mean, how comfortable and how technical are you? Because there's a lot of capability in these platforms. And if you are kind of a rock star from technology, you can really have a pretty effective, almost more effective deposition using technology in a manner in which that you're very, very comfortable, because you really have the facility and the ease and confidence to do that. On the other hand, if this is an environment that you're not really comfortable in, don't try to do too much. And by that I mean is, use the environment, but try to make it as much like your traditional deposition as you can, realizing that some of it's going to be different. Just by nature, the very nature of everyone being remote, this is a different kind of setting. But don't overcomplicate it. And it's pretty easy to get tempted to overcomplicate it because you see all these kind of cool tools. So for example, screen sharing, and I'm going to talk a fair amount about exhibits and whatnot. There are some really great things you can do in a deposition setting using technology. But if it's not kind of within your wheelhouse, or you don't have an associate or maybe a litigation specialist or someone else who can help you do that, don't try to go too far. So that's kind of just a basic overview, and I'm going to spend a few minutes showing you some things, and we'll have some time afterward for some questions and answers. So first thing I'm going to show you is, and this is a pretty generic piece of information, but I'm going to take this URL. I'm actually going to put it into a chat box, because you can see I am chatting to everyone. So everyone will get this message. And one, it gives you an idea of how you can use chat, but it also is a pretty effective practice guide, things to think about when you're taking a deposition. And this is obviously, we're a court reporting company, we developed this, and there'll be a lot of references to our technologies, but there's also a lot of really good, just general considerations. So there's some videos, there's some checklists, and this one, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on the checklist page. So obviously there's the notice concept. So there, you want to make your all the parties aware that this is going to be taking place remotely, and there's some recommended language, some sample notice language that you want to put into that notice. The other thing you want to think about is, okay, exhibits, and we're going to talk about exhibits. Emily spoke about exhibits as well. Also want to think about breakout rooms, and breakout rooms can be a really effective one, particularly for a mediation. There is a feature within Zoom that allows you to convene as a large group, and then to actually disperse into smaller groups like you would in a traditional mediation at a place like JAMS or something like that. That requires some advanced preparation. So whoever is the host for your session, you're going to want to let them know that we're going to have breakout rooms. In the case of our company, we actually would have someone manage that process, that breakout room process for you. It's a service that a concierge service that we provide. But however you do it, you're going to want to make sure that you have both the capability as well as kind of a process and a workflow as to how that's going to happen. The thing about mediations, which is different when you're doing them virtually, is typically if you're at a mediation facility, there's a concept of everyone comes together, then everyone goes into their group, and the mediator will go from room to room. And you're pretty much committed to being there. When you're doing it virtually, kind of one of the upsides to this is if the mediator isn't in your room, you can kind of do some other things while you're waiting, because there is a fair amount of the waiting aspects that happens in mediations. But you also want to make sure you're ready when the mediator comes into the room. So you want to think about kind of what are the mechanics of that. But it really is an effective way to be remote, to have that common group setting, and then to be able to go into smaller groups and to be able to conduct whatever negotiations, considerations, et cetera, in terms of your offers and whatnot. So the mediation practice is thriving through this process. It just takes a little bit of getting used to. We talked about videography. If you're going to want to record the session, you definitely want to have someone managing that process for you, but it can be very, very effective. I think the other comment that's been made both by Emily and Lee is be early, test, and there are lots of places to do tests. Actually, you can do speed tests to check the speed of your connection. Google has one. If you just type in Google speed test, you actually get a Google speed test. And actually what it does is it measures your bandwidth. Do you have the capability to handle a remote setting, both uploads and download speeds? So those are important. Typically, they say you need at least 1.5 meg of up and down speed to be able to have a video conference. The nice thing about Zoom, and one of the reasons Zoom has thrived in this new environment, is they do a really good job of managing bandwidth. Some of the other sites will actually kind of bring everything down to the lowest common denominator. So if someone has a really poor connection, everybody has a pretty poor experience because it kind of winds down or lowers the bandwidth to that lowest common denominator. And Zoom does it independently. So if someone does happen to have a bad connection, it doesn't bring everybody down to that lowest common denominator. Connecting early. I can't emphasize this enough. And actually, we opened some of our offices over the past couple of weeks for depositions. So we're actually starting to have some element of in-person events, but every single one of the ones that I was personally involved in had a remote element to it. So even though the defending attorney and the witness in one case were together, the questioning attorney was actually still dialing in remotely. So even though it was an in-person deposition, it was kind of more of a hybrid where it was some people were together and some people weren't together. And invariably, there are challenges, depending again on the sophistication of the witness. In one case, we had an elderly witness who just didn't have really good facility with technology. So getting there early, just like in a court proceeding, even in a deposition, be respectful of the other parties and get there early and connect. We're going to talk about exhibits in pretty good detail, so I'm going to skip that part. And we talked about breakout rooms, particularly as it relates to mediations. But think about stipulations and think about what you and your adversary have agreed to and put them on the record to say, hey, this is the proceeding that we're conducting. We're doing it remotely. We've all agreed about X, Y, and Z, and have some, pre-agreed upon stipulations that you're going to kind of have. And again, I would recommend putting them on the record and then setting the rules of conduct and how you're going to conduct this deposition and agreeing to that. So this is on this site, you'll see there's a lot more information. I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of that. I'm going to flip over to a PowerPoint presentation that I have a little bit, some additional information that I'd like to share. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then reshare it. And this is one of the things you kind of need to get comfortable with when you're kind of navigating through any of these platforms is what do people see? How do they see it? And for example, what I'm showing you here is you're seeing the wrong slide. And I showed you that just to kind of give you a sense of, geez, I picked the screen I wanted to share, but I actually shared the wrong screen because the screen I want to share is the presentation mode and not the side where I'm actually looking at my side of the screen. So let me go back up here and try that one more time. And then hopefully this works properly. Okay, and it didn't, but you still get my sense here. What you see here is I'm going through the idea of when you do a remote deposition, you can actually do real time, you can introduce exhibits, you can do lots of things on the same screen. Again, prepare and test, connect early. So when we talk about capturing the record, and this kind of then expands upon a little bit of the comments that Emily made, where the attorney and the person who were in the courtroom were turning away from the court reporter and all the people who were attending remotely, think about the record. And the record is really critically important. So one of the nice things about going on mute and going off mute, it actually provides a little bit of that space that you need. It's very easy in these remote settings to talk over one another. So by doing just the physical muting and unmuting, it actually almost provides you as a bit of a kind of a proxy for counting and allowing for that space. So I kind of recommend using the mute button just for the purposes of having enough time for the witness to complete their answer, so you're not likely to talk over them, and also for the witness to hear the whole question before they provide their answer. So that's kind of another thing to think about in terms of the record. We'll talk a little bit more about the record when we talk about exhibits. So the other things we talked again, stipulations, breakouts, marking exhibits. Technical issues are always the kinds of things to think about that will happen. In advance, making sure everyone receives their credentials, that they have adequate connectivity doing that test, exhibits, getting there early, and the practice guide that I talked about. You can do real time with these events, and I'll show you a little bit about what that looked like. Again, at 1.5 megs per second. Now, on this site, you'll see that I have an external camera and a telephone. I actually am using my iPhone with these earbuds and an external webcam, and a couple of reasons for that. So if you're using a laptop with the built-in camera, you're basically beholden to just the angle of the laptop. And as Emily said, she has a box where her laptop is on. I actually have a box that my laptop's on just for this the height of the keyboard while I'm talking. But I actually have a separate webcam on a little tripod that's actually pointing at me. I also use the audio source of a separate phone because things happen. I actually was talking to a client the other day. In the middle of their deposition, they had power outage. So their computer went down. If they were on a mobile phone, assuming the cell tower didn't lose power, they would have been able to continue to conduct the deposition and to be able to at least participate from an audio perspective. So I actually like to separate the audio from the video. And when you logged in, it actually gives you the ability to either connect through your computer or connect through your phone. So that is just, again, a consideration, and it's something that I personally advocate and think it's a good idea to do. Again, you'll see that you can join the meeting and whatnot. So I'm now going to go and I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to talk a little bit about exhibits. And let me go back and share my screen again. And here I have a solution that Veritex has developed, but it's not the only solution that's out there. That's called Exhibit Share. What I also did here is showed you that you can have real time going at the same time. In both of these cases, and this is one of the things to kind of wrap your head around, I'm doing screen share. So you see me sharing my screen, but I don't have to be doing screen share in order to share exhibits. And the reason is I'm going to show you how you could use a solution like a cloud-based file sharing service as a way to introduce exhibits. So in this particular case, I'm going to show you it via screen share, but think about it as I'm talking to it that you don't necessarily need to be sharing your screen to do this. So I'm just going to minimize the real time. Just wanted you to get a sense that you can in fact do that. So a couple of things. If you've ever used any of these file sharing solutions, that's Dropbox, Google Drive, whatever, that's basically what I'm going to show you. And Veritex has built one on top of a platform called Ignite, but they all have the same basic capability. The difference about our solution is we actually have built an application on top of it, which allows you to mark and introduce exhibits. So you would structure it. I showed you I had a case, the McCann versus Gadget case, and I have a number of depositions. And under these depositions, I have a marked exhibit folder. And typically that marked exhibit folder would be empty because I haven't marked any exhibits yet. The marked exhibit folder is what you share with all of your counterparties. So this actually addresses the issue that Emily brought up of kind of that surprise exhibit, that document that you really don't want to send in advance. And certainly the ability to send a hard copy sealed envelope in advance of a deposition is kind of a real world and analog way to do that. This is really kind of the digital equivalent to that. And what you do is you basically have a folder, a set of folders under that they're your private folders. And what you do is you take your documents and you introduce them into that marked exhibit folder. And in our case, we've built an application to do that, but you can do it manually as well by doing a rename, like a renaming function. So I'm going to call this 1001. I'm going to introduce that exhibit. It's now going to load that file up. You'll see it's stamped the document. And now if I go back to that, that file, I can see in that marked exhibit folder that one document will be there. So now what I've done is I've taken the document that's in my private folder, I've named it, I've marked it, and I've copied it into this marked exhibit folder. And it's at that point in time now that any other party to the case, the witness, their attorney, or any other participant will see the document. So importantly, they see the entire document. So if I'm only going to focus on a portion of the document, they are actually seeing the entire document. Again, you'll see that it's stamped, so they will see that that document is the actual document. So they can scroll through it at their own pace. They can see the context of the document. Oftentimes, when you introduce an exhibit in a traditional deposition, the witness will want some time to familiarize themselves with the document. And by using a file sharing solution, you're actually giving them access to the entire document. So there is no issue of taking something out of context. The other thing about this, and I mentioned earlier that you don't really want to do file sharing through the Zoom chat feature, is these documents reside in the cloud. So the document is not on your computer, it's not on the witness's computer, and so anything, if there is some issue with the file, it's actually the file is in the cloud and not on your computer. Now, the other part that I'll mention, this is kind of where I'm going to try to explain what I'm showing you here. You can do this without screen sharing. I happen to be screen sharing, but if you think about it, when you're in the deposition suite and you hand the document to the witness and you start to conduct the examination, you talk them through where you want them to navigate in the document. That serves two purposes. One, it navigates the witness to the right point in the exhibit, but it also creates the record of where that navigation is. So 6 months from now, someone reading the transcript and has the associated exhibits would be able to navigate to that particular place in the document. If you're relying solely on screen sharing, I kind of consider that the virtual equivalent of getting up from your chair, walking around behind the witness and pointing to the document, which you obviously wouldn't do, or you wouldn't do unless it was an extreme case. So screen sharing is kind of the virtual equivalent of doing that. However, if the document or the exhibit happens to be some type of demonstrative, it's a photograph, it's a map, it's some kind of drawing at the intersection of an accident or something like that, that actually could be an effective way to draw the witness's attention to the place in the photograph, for example, that you want their attention to be. So I'm going to show you kind of what that would look like using screen sharing. So now I want you to kind of take your head and twist it a bit. I am actually going to be showing you what you would do in a deposition if you were sharing your screen. So I'm going to take a photograph here. I'm going to preview it because I want to say, yes, this is the document. I am going to introduce it. So you'll see here, I'm going to introduce that document. Because it's a photograph, I can't stamp it, but I can name it, and I'm going to introduce it. And now when I go into this file, I'm actually going to go back to that marked exhibit folder. You'll see that document is there. And now I'm going to actually annotate the document. And I'm doing this mainly for the purposes of highlighting to the witness where I want their attention to be. So I could take a tool in Zoom, and this is a highlight tool, and I can say, I'd like you to tell me about how far that piece of metal is sticking out from the edge of the perimeter of this building that's under construction. I'm not creating an exhibit. I'm not creating a new document. I'm basically drawing the witness's attention to that. Now, the one thing I failed to do as I did that is I didn't really specifically state where I was placing that arrow. And again, thinking about the transcript and thinking about the record, you'd want to be very, very descriptive about where you're drawing that angle. So while this is helpful potentially to have the witness draw their attention to the point in the document I want them to pay attention to, I don't want to over-rely on that, and I certainly don't want it to impact the record. The other thing I'd recommend is goes back to that don't get too far over your skis comment I made at the outset, is you can, if you're really comfortable, depending on the sophistication of the witness, even hand over annotation capability to a witness and ask them to do an annotation on the screen through Zoom. And it actually has the ability to save those annotations. Again, another great and really useful, potentially useful feature of Zoom. If it's not within your comfort zone, don't go there, because you will lose control of the deposition, because all of a sudden now it becomes a technology game and not, getting the most effective testimony, which after all is really what your goal is to get the most effective testimony. A couple of things also about that, the sharing of doing screen sharing with particularly annotations. You're actually not in Zoom annotating the image, you're actually annotating the screen. So if I were to have scrolled that screen, you'd see that the arrow doesn't move and the picture could move. So again, there are some limitations and things that you want to think about when you're doing that, and not getting too far afield from your comfort zone. So, so that's kind of one way to introduce exhibits. Again, if you wanted to use a file sharing system, that works. If you wanted to, send or send in advance documents, if you wanted to do screen share, there are lots of different ways to do it. I had one client who was very sensitive to the fact that their documents, or in this particular case, it was actually source code, so computer source code, and they didn't want a third-party witness to have the actual source code. So there was going to be a fair amount of examination of this witness on the source code, but they didn't want the witness to actually have take physical possession of the code. So in that case, they made the determination that screen sharing was the most effective way to do it. They showed the witness the code on their screen and conducted the examination. That was agreed to by all parties. And in that particular scenario, they relied upon the technology, but also were able to preserve the confidentiality of the documents and the fact that they didn't want to take those documents out of their control. So just gives you a little bit of understanding of the options you have. And I guess that's really what it all comes down to. There is a ton of flexibility with these systems. There are a ton of options with these systems. And each of those have pros and cons. There are kind of both the benefits of them and the potential risks in doing those and using various tools. And the main thing, again, is to not let the technology drive the deposition. Your goal in any deposition is to get the most effective testimony you can. Let the technology be a tool to help you do that, but don't let it take you off ultimately achieving that goal. Realizing that we're in this environment, we're probably going to be in this environment for a while. As I mentioned, even some of the in-person events that I've been a party to still had a virtual remote component to it, and I would expect that will continue both from a safety perspective, but even after the fact may continue as just a practical matter. If you don't have to be at a particular deposition, depending, you know, if it's a fact-based witness, it's non-adversarial, you know, we're just trying to get some some information into the record. You know, I might make the determination that I don't need to get on an airplane, or I don't need to, you know, battle the, you know, traffic on the perimeter. I could just take this deposition remotely and potentially save that time and have the opportunity cost of getting to the deposition and getting from the deposition to be time that now I have back. So, you know, other things to consider as you go through the decision-making process of which tools to use. So hopefully that was helpful and informative, and I think we have some time for questions. And Lee, you have to unmute yourself.
One of my lessons, right? Unmute. All right, so I think that we don't have any other questions, and let's see, I think we have one more speaker. Possibly he's getting set up. He's actually in the middle of a mediation, and he may not be able to jump on.
Okay, let's see.
Oh, there he goes. I think he is on. The Honorable Gino Brogdon.
Yeah, it won't let me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Hold on. Let me see if I can
my video in there. There it
get
is.
your video
Start my
in.
video.
There we go.
All
Thank
right.
you. I know you're
Okay.
busy, so just whatever you can share with us would be great.
Yes. Well, I had the pleasure of listening to the smart brother Brian McCann before I got on here, and this is why I didn't like law school, because dudes like that messed the curve up. You know, he explained from a technical standpoint many of the challenges of using Zoom or other kind of software for something like a mediation. Now, I'm a full-time mediator, and I'm approaching about 3,000 mediations. I do it every day and have done so for nearly 10 years. And this Zoom mediation or video mediation is the new world. I mean, I was going to start this out as welcome to the new world, because doing a mediation remotely, now people are starting to kind of embrace the reality of it, and they are able to kind of get past the impersonal part of it. Because one of the things you're missing in a mediation remotely or by video is you don't have the touchy-feely stuff. And you can tell, frankly, from my presentation that I get in there where the vessels are. You know, I have much more of a personal approach to mediations where I want to connect with people. Now, you can do that by video, but it's not the same. I'd be telling you a story if I told you that the connection is the same. It hampers me some, and it hampers the parties a little bit if your mediation will benefit from a personal connection. Many mediations, you don't have to have that. You just got to have the right people there, hear the right stuff, and make the right decisions. But some mediations require a personal connection and require kind of being in person with the unspoken stuff. I don't think that's most mediations, at least within my bailiwick. I do mainly blood and guts kind of stuff, do some professional liability stuff, but most of the mediations in my area of practice can be done remotely. Now, I probably would be lying to you if I told you it's just as good as being there in person. It's not, okay? But it's a damn good second if you can't get in person. And given our health situation in this country now, that reality is forcing people to do this. The biggest challenge with mediations remotely have been really two things. One is a technical challenge that Brother Brian Brian spoke to, which is your internet not strong enough or your crashes or whatever, like mine did today. I was at home and I was on a video mediation, and my my Walmart video package did not happen. So I had to drive up here and put this mediation on at Henning Spot. But the internet strength is a real challenge if you don't have good internet, and it'll waste a lot of time. But the second challenge that I think is more important is some people, because it's video, they don't really invest in it in terms of emotionally and attentively, because they're not there with me as their only object of attention. Y'all can see I need and desire attention. But there's a certain way that I'm able as a mediator to keep somebody's focus when all they got to worry about is whether I'm in the room. With video mediation, they got kids running around. I see people's dogs jump in the picture. I mean, it's all kind of stuff. But those are just some of the frailties of the process of remoteness. But I do sense that some people are not as invested in the process because you're not all committed physically to the process by being in the same building or the same room. The sharing screens has worked seamlessly for me. And those people who are inclined to give hour-and-a-half openings for if you're in a jurisdiction where they give openings, video mediations make them speed up because there's not all of the kind of the drama play to it. But the video mediations also have been faster. That is, and I think some of that is, I don't have to hobble down the hallway with these old football injuries and walk between rooms, right? So you eliminate that time. And I think when people know that you're a click away, they make decisions faster. And there's something about it that makes people really efficient. And my first video mediation I started with was a 30 people on the screen. Now, I've done a number of them now, and I'm in the middle of one where they've taken a break so I could talk to y'all. But there were 30 people on the screen, and I was moving everybody everywhere. But as long as you set up your breakout rooms and have a plan, I think, for example, if you're doing a mediation where you're one of several defendants, that is, each of you has a different carrier, get a plan for how you're going to negotiate before the video mediation, because the physical separation also creates an emotional separation where people aren't willing, when I've got multiple parties, particularly on the defense side, they don't seem as willing to kind of get together and work. They stay in their virtual fiefdoms and sometimes to the detriment of the process, because there can be safety in numbers on the defense side. But video mediations make people less inclined to kind of virtually walk down the hall and talk. Now, if you haven't done Zoom, Zoom with the breakout rooms allows me as the controller, the host, to take two lawyers and put them in a room so they can talk. It ain't like being in person, but I like that feature because it lets us get down to business and cut away a lot of the fat. The video mediations are, I think they're a little bit more efficient than the waiting around and things that go on in a physical mediation. They are easier to schedule because they don't involve travel. You got adjusters and lawyers and clients from all over. I had people from all over the country on several of my mediations where once they got used to the idea of being away, it was pretty good. And to eliminate the travel is kind of the thing of the future in light of where we're going. I wholeheartedly recommend that people consider video mediations unless the personal touch is a necessity. Now, lawyers are creatures of habit, and most lawyers are like prize fighters where they think, boy, if I just get in there and I get with those people, they're going to see the magic and see that I'm still the champ. Probably none of us are really that good. The personal stuff makes a difference, but I don't think the absence of being there physically is going to hamper most mediations. My listing of the various things you should think about, a lot of it was covered by Brian. Understand how to use your mute buttons and the video buttons. Know that whenever your picture, your face is on that screen, that somebody's at least reading your lips. Beware of your background when you do a video mediation. If your office is as messy as mine, you might want to clean it up a little bit. Understand that the chat on the side can be used to create a sub-level dialogue, both with the mediator as well as with other people. And have a plan as to how you're going to handle the settlement memo, because at the end of every one of those that I'm fortunately able to get done with people in an in-person mediation, I put it in a memo. I'm the scrivener. I've got a little templates and things, and I put it together. So when we come up with the number and conditions, that stuff is down like Bobby Brown. Can't do that necessarily in a video mediation, but I, as the mediator, can send you the settlement memo and you fool with it. E-sign if you want to. But what I've told lawyers is probably the most efficient thing to do is to understand what your terms are and exchange those terms before the mediation. Because some of them are simply not going to change. Full release of all claims, confidentiality, handle all liens, bills, third-party claims, when you get the money, when the case is dismissed, who gets released, things like that. Those things don't really change in a mediation. Sometimes there are additional terms that are a little more sexy, and you need to talk about those in the mediation. But the things that are kind of the customary terms, lawyers should work that out before the video mediation. So when we get to the number, it's just a matter of closing the book, and that cake is baked. But I've enjoyed them. I really have. Now I dig the being in person more, because that's, it's part of me being the youngest of 11 children. I want a lot of folks around me. But the video mediations have worked really well. They just have, and I think it's the wave of the future. Ms. Watts, I'm willing to take any questions before these folks pull me back in.
All right, let's see if we have any. I don't think, I'll give people a second. I don't think anything has come in.
Oh, thank you, Lord.
But it was very informative. I think a lot of us shared a lot of the same information, and then you came in and at a perfect time and added some other things that we didn't cover.
Yes, ma'am.
Everybody should be ready for some great video presentations and video conferencing and mediations and depositions and all that. Oh, wait, we got one question that just...
And if after today anybody has a question or something, I'm online, give me a call. I'm always willing to talk about it. So if something comes up, I'm kind of hard to forget.
All right. We just have one participant that thanked you for your energy and for speaking to us. So.
Oh, listen, the pleasure is mine. I am the most fortunate guy to ever walk the earth. And to be able to be a neutral and to work in the industry in interesting cases and have very little of the risk and stress, I'm telling you, I'm like a leprechaun that fell into a pot of gold.
Well, great.
Yes, ma'am.
Love what you do. So thank you so much. Thank you to all our panelists today, Emily Ward, Brian McCann. Thank you, guests, for attending. We still have a strong number on that stuck with us throughout all of this. We did record this session, and we'll get a link out to all of the attendees. And of course, we're applying for CLE for this as well. So we'll follow up with you on all of that. Again, thank you, and you all have a
thank you. And keep me in mind in the future. Thank you.
All right, thank you.